Welcome to Veiled Narratives, where every heartbeat tells a story veiled in mystery, passion, and fate. Here, love isn't found, it's destined. So, sit back, open your heart, and let the story unfold. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday. Ethan Cole, a quiet, self-made man living on the edge of a sleepy mountain town, had only one thing on his mind: groceries. The rain drummed softly against his old truck as he drove down the winding roads, unaware that fate had already written a different list for him that day. One that didn't include bread, milk, or coffee but her. When he pulled into Harper's Market, he saw her. A woman standing in the middle of the parking lot, struggling to hold a paper bag as the wind tore through her hair. There was something fragile yet fierce about her, as if she had weathered storms and still dared to smile at the thunder. Her name was Clara Bennett. A writer from the city, newly arrived and completely lost, both on the map and in life. Her car had broken down, her phone was dead, and she was trying desperately to make the best of it. Ethan, without hesitation, offered help. What began as a simple act of kindness became the first spark of something extraordinary. He helped her fix her car, but when the storm worsened, he insisted she stay at his cabin until it passed. She hesitated. City instincts told her no, but his calm eyes and gentle voice disarmed her fears. And that night, under the amber glow of firelight, they spoke for hours. Clara told him how she'd come to the mountains to escape the noise of a life that looked perfect on the outside, but hollowed her inside. Ethan listened quietly, his heart aching for a woman who spoke like poetry and looked like peace. As days turned into weeks, her car remained unfixed, though they both knew it could have been repaired long ago. They shared mornings filled with laughter, late evenings of quiet companionship, and slow, unspoken confessions in every lingering glance. Ethan taught her how to fish in the crystal stream behind his cabin, and she taught him how to listen, to life, to dreams, to love again. Every word she wrote in her journal carried his presence. Every time he looked at her, he saw the home he never knew he needed. But love, like all beautiful things, tested them. When Clara's publisher demanded her return to the city, she had to choose between her old world and the man who had silently rebuilt her heart. Ethan didn't ask her to stay. He simply said, "The mountains will remember you and so will I." She left with tears, a heart full of him, and a promise to return. Months passed. Winter melted into spring. Then, one morning, Ethan drove back into town for groceries, and found her waiting by the same market, holding a single paper bag and that same breathtaking smile. This time, she wasn't lost. She was home. The morning had that kind of calm that only small towns know, where sunlight drips slowly through pine branches and the air smells faintly of rain and wild honey. Ethan Cole awoke to the gentle hum of nature around his cabin, unaware that this quiet day would rearrange the course of his life. He was a man of routine, steady, grounded, and unbothered by the world's noise. A former architect turned recluse, Ethan had traded skyscrapers for solitude, city lights for candlelight, and the rush of deadlines for the peace of dawn. His cabin sat on the edge of Silverwood Ridge, a stretch of land kissed by fog in the mornings and silence by night. On this particular Sunday, his only intention was simple: drive into town for groceries, coffee, bread, fruit, and maybe a few cans of paint for his porch. Nothing extraordinary, nothing memorable, just another day to be lived quietly, untouched by chaos. He stepped outside, pulling on his worn leather jacket as a breeze brushed against his face. The forest stretched endlessly before him, dew shimmering like diamonds on the leaves. He ran a hand through his slightly tousled hair and smiled faintly. The world was calm, and so was he. He started his truck, an old black Ford that growled to life after a few patient turns of the key. The road to town wound through misty hills and open fields. Each turn whispered of forgotten stories, of loves and losses buried under time. Ethan wasn't looking for a story anymore. He had loved once, deeply, painfully, and when that chapter ended, he closed the book entirely. But destiny, in all its quiet arrogance, loves to surprise those who have stopped expecting miracles. By the time he reached the outskirts of town, clouds began to gather, soft gray and heavy with rain. The first drops hit his windshield like a promise of change. The marketplace was nearly empty, save for a few locals hurrying inside shops. He parked his truck, grabbed his list, and stepped into the drizzle, unaware that his list was about to become irrelevant. As he crossed the parking lot, he saw her. She stood by a silver sedan, her paper grocery bag torn open, fruits rolling across the wet pavement. Her umbrella had flipped inside out, her hair, a cascade of chestnut curls, was damp and wild, and her soft laughter floated through the rain as she tried to gather the scattered apples. Something about her stopped him. Not just her beauty, though she was the kind of beautiful that made time hesitate, but the way she seemed to exist fully in that moment, unbothered by the storm. Ethan's instinct was simple and uncalculated. He walked over, bent down, and began picking up the fallen apples without saying a word. When their hands brushed, just barely, a jolt of awareness rippled through him, quiet but certain. She looked up and their eyes met for the first time. They didn't speak immediately. The world around them blurred, as though the rain itself had slowed to watch. Her eyes were the kind that carried stories, deep, warm, and just a little bit sad. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice soft, carrying the faintest tremor. He smiled slightly. "Looks like the storm had other plans for your groceries." She laughed, and that sound, light, genuine, unguarded, cut through the dullness that had lived in him for years. "I should have known better," she said, brushing wet hair from her face. "I thought small towns were supposed to be calm and predictable." "They usually are," Ethan replied. "Except on days when the universe decides to have a sense of humor." And just like that, something shifted. The simplicity of their exchange carried an undercurrent of something more. Something neither could name yet but both could feel. He offered to help her carry the groceries inside, and she accepted. Her name, he learned, was Clara Bennett. A writer, new to town, searching for quiet after losing herself in the chaos of city life. She was supposed to stay for only a week to finish a novel, but as she spoke, Ethan noticed something. The way she looked at the world, as if every detail carried meaning. She wasn't just existing, she was feeling everything. When they reached her car, it refused to start. She sighed, shoulders sinking, and muttered something about bad timing. The rain intensified, thunder rolling in the distance. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before offering. "There's a cafe nearby, and the storm's not letting up. Let me drive you. We'll call someone for the car." She hesitated, then nodded, trusting him without knowing why. Inside his truck, the silence between them wasn't awkward, it was charged. Raindrops painted the windows as the town lights blurred into soft golden trails. Clara glanced at him from the corner of her eye, and he caught her. They both smiled faintly, knowingly. Two strangers already aware that something unexplainable had begun. By the time they reached the cafe, Ethan knew one thing for certain. He would never again look at an ordinary grocery trip the same way. Because that day, amid rain and coincidence, the universe had rewritten his story with a single touch, a single look, and a woman who felt like both a mystery and a homecoming. And that was how the ordinary became destiny. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. It fell softly against the glass of the little cafe where Ethan and Clara sat, their hands curled around steaming mugs of coffee that neither of them seemed to drink. Outside, the world blurred in silver and gray. Inside, the air shimmered with unspoken words. Clara Bennett, the name sounded like poetry, the kind of name that didn't just belong to a person, but to a story waiting to be told. There was something about her that drew Ethan in, not in the loud, reckless way of infatuation, but in the quiet gravity of recognition. She sat across from him, wearing a cream sweater that fell loosely around her shoulders, her curls still damp from the rain. Her eyes wandered, tracing raindrops on the window, the flicker of candlelight on his jacket, the way steam curled from the cup between her fingers. She looked lost, not in the room but in her thoughts. "So you're new in town?" Ethan asked softly, breaking the silence. Clara smiled faintly, a sadness flickering at the corners of her lips. "New, yes. Maybe escaping would be a better word." He didn't press. Something in her tone told him she wasn't used to being asked gently. After a pause, she looked at him, really looked, and for a moment, he felt stripped bare. "I used to live in the city," she said. "You know, the kind of place where time doesn't stop for anyone, where everyone's always chasing something. Love, money, dreams, validation. I was chasing all of it, I guess. And somewhere along the way, I lost myself." Her voice trembled, but she steadied it with a breath. "I wrote stories about love, about life, about peace. But I never really lived them. Everything I wrote was borrowed emotion, second-hand dreams." Ethan leaned forward slightly, his gaze soft but unwavering. "And now," she looked outside again, watching raindrops slide down the glass. "Now I just want quiet. I came here thinking I'd find it in the silence of the mountains. But I think quiet isn't something you find. It's something you feel. and I haven't felt that in a long time. Ethan didn't realize it then, but those words would linger in him for days. She was a paradox, a woman of stillness and storms. She carried peace in her voice and chaos in her eyes. Her laughter was gentle, but her silence could shake a soul. She was beauty wrapped in fragility, confidence built from brokenness. Over the next few hours, their conversation flowed effortlessly, about books, music, life, and the strange comfort of solitude. Ethan told her about the mountains, how he'd left his career as an architect in the city to rebuild his own sense of meaning. People build towers, he said, but sometimes they forget to build themselves. She smiled at that. A real smile this time, and something warm flickered in her chest. For the first time in months, she wasn't performing. She wasn't the writer, or the broken lover, or the woman who had to pretend to be strong. She was just Clara. When the rain finally softened into a drizzle, Ethan stood and offered to drive her home. But when they reached her rented cottage, her car still sat lifeless in the driveway. The mechanic couldn't come until morning. Then you'll need a ride tomorrow, Ethan said lightly. And breakfast. I make a mean omelette, mountain style. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You don't even know if I eat breakfast. I don't, he said, his eyes glinting with warmth. But I intend to find out. That night, she sat by her window after he dropped her off, watching the distant glow of his truck disappear down the wet road. Something about that man, the quiet confidence, the unspoken understanding, lingered in her mind like the scent of rain after a storm. Ethan, on the other hand, drove back through the fog with a heart he hadn't felt in years. Awake, alive, and curiously light. Over the next few days, the universe found little excuses to bring them together. A coffee run here, a flat tire there, a shared walk down the trail that bordered her cottage. Each meeting was accidental, or maybe, not at all. One afternoon they found themselves by the stream near his cabin. Clara's shoes were off, her feet dipped in the cold water as sunlight filtered through the pines. Ethan stood nearby, arms folded, watching her laugh as she tried to catch a drifting leaf. You don't laugh like someone who's escaping, he said quietly. She looked up at him, the golden light catching in her eyes. Maybe that's because I'm starting to forget what I was running from. And in that instant, Ethan knew. This woman wasn't a passing encounter. She was a force, a heartbeat, a second chance wrapped in the gentleness of a smile. He didn't need to ask for more. He didn't need to name it. Sometimes, the most powerful connections don't demand definition, they simply exist. As evening descended, the first stars appeared above the ridges. Clara closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. It's strange, she whispered. I've been searching for quiet all my life, but I think I found it. In someone's presence, not in silence. Ethan didn't reply. He didn't have to. The moment spoke for them both, and somewhere between the hush of the mountains and the hum of the stream, love, soft, slow, and unexpected, began to take shape. She was still a storm, yes, but she was his storm now. One he didn't want to calm, only understand. The morning after the storm, the world looked newly born. Mist rose from the mountains like silver silk, wrapping the valley in a soft, dreamlike glow. The earth smelled of pine and promise, and at the edge of that wilderness stood Ethan's cabin, quiet, strong, and timeless, just like the man himself. Clara arrived early that day. Her car was still refusing to start, and when Ethan offered to take her into town to call the mechanic, she accepted, though something in her heart told her it wasn't the car she was meant to fix. When she stepped into his cabin, she stopped at the threshold. The place was everything she had imagined solitude to be, rustic, warm, and bathed in amber light. The scent of cedar and coffee filled the air. Books lined the shelves, sketches of landscapes and architectural designs lay scattered across the table, and near the fireplace, a guitar leaned silently, its strings catching the sunlight. You built this? She asked softly, her fingers tracing the wooden doorframe. Ethan nodded. Every piece of it. It's my way of remembering that creation can come after loss. She looked at him then. Really looked. And her heart tugged gently. There was a stillness in him that spoke louder than words, a peace that had been earned through pain. He poured her coffee, served breakfast, and they ate in quiet comfort. Every movement between them carried an invisible rhythm. The brush of fingers as they passed a plate, the shared smiles that said more than sentences ever could. After breakfast, Clara wandered outside. The cabin sat beside a stream, its water glinting under sunlight like melted glass. She knelt beside it, running her hands through the current. The coldness bit her skin, but it felt alive, cleansing. Ethan joined her, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth even in the mountain chill. "You spend a lot of time out here?" she asked. He nodded. "This is where the noise fades. I come here when I need to remember who I am." She turned her gaze to him. "And do you remember?" His eyes softened. "Most days. Some days, I just try to forget who I was." Her breath caught, not because of the words, but because of the honesty behind them. She understood that kind of forgetting. She'd been living it. They spent the afternoon walking along the ridge trail. Ethan showed her the places he loved: a hollow tree where foxes sometimes hid, a field of wildflowers that swayed like a sea of color, and the overlook where the valley stretched endlessly below. The air there was crisp, almost sacred. As the wind brushed through Clara's hair, Ethan found himself watching her. The way her eyes lit with wonder, the way she breathed in the beauty as if she'd been starving for it. She didn't just see the world, she felt it. "You really love it here," she said softly. He smiled, hands in his pockets. "I didn't at first, it was too quiet, too honest, but then I realized. The silence only feels heavy when you're afraid to listen to yourself." Clara's gaze lingered on him. "You make it sound like silence is a person you've learned to live with." He looked toward the horizon, then back at her. "Maybe it is. And maybe today, it feels a little less lonely." The air between them shifted then, charged, delicate, and undeniable. She felt it like the pulse of the earth beneath her feet. That slow, magnetic pull toward something she didn't yet understand. As the sun began to dip, they returned to the cabin. Ethan lit the fireplace, its flames dancing golden and wild. Clara sat near it, watching him move around the room with quiet grace. There was something deeply intimate about watching someone in their space. No masks, no pretenses, just being. He joined her by the fire, sitting close but not too close. The crackling wood filled the silence. She turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" "The life before all this. The city, the people, the noise." He took a moment before answering. "Sometimes. But then I remember. Noise doesn't mean connection. Silence doesn't mean emptiness. Sometimes, it's the quiet places that make you hear the loudest truths." Her chest tightened. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "You talk like someone who's healed." He smiled faintly. "Or maybe someone still learning how." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The firelight painted her face in shades of gold and rose, her eyes reflecting the flames like two galaxies. Ethan felt his breath hitch, not from desire, but from recognition. She wasn't a stranger anymore. She was something his soul had known before his mind could understand it. The storm had brought her to him, but peace was keeping her there. As night deepened, Clara rose to leave. He walked her to the door, the world outside wrapped in silver moonlight. Before she stepped out, she turned back to him. "Thank you for today." He met her gaze, voice low and steady. "You don't have to thank me, Clara. Some days just happen, right? Even when we least expect them to." And as she walked down the path toward her cottage, her heart carried something she hadn't felt in years: stillness. Not emptiness, not loneliness, but stillness that breathed. In that cabin, under the quiet sky, something inside her began to heal, not with grand gestures or spoken promises, but with the gentle presence of a man who asked for nothing, yet offered everything. The days that followed felt like borrowed time. The rain had long stopped, the valley had bloomed again, and life seemed to move in rhythm with their unspoken connection. For Clara and Ethan, every sunrise carried new softness, every evening a quiet ache, as if both knew the clock was ticking on something they didn't want to end. Clara had found her rhythm in the mountains. Her mornings began with coffee on Ethan's porch, wrapped in his blanket, watching the fog lift like a curtain revealing another perfect day. She wrote in his cabin, words flowing like rivers finally freed. Her stories, once hollow, now pulsed with life. Each sentence carried traces of his voice, his stillness, his strength. Ethan, too, had changed. For years his cabin had been a sanctuary of silence, but now it echoed with laughter, music, and conversation that stretched late into the night. He'd forgotten what it felt like to share space with someone and not feel crowded. With Clara, the quiet became warm again. But love, in its tender way, often tests what it builds. It came suddenly, the call from Clara's publisher. Her book was due in 2 weeks. The city was waiting. Contracts, deadlines, interviews. The world she had escaped was calling her back. When she hung up, her hands trembled. She looked around the cabin, the sunlight spilling across the wooden floor, the scent of cedar, the faint hum of Ethan's guitar from the next room. She realized that leaving this place would mean leaving the peace she had only just begun to understand. That evening, she found him by the fire, tuning the old guitar. His eyes lifted as she entered, instantly reading the storm behind her calm expression. "You got news," he said quietly. She nodded, sitting across from him. "They want me back in the city. My editor says the new book's a masterpiece, but they need me there for the release." Ethan set the guitar down gently. The silence stretched between them, heavy but unbroken. "How long will you be gone?" he asked finally. "I don't know," she whispered. "A few weeks, maybe months." He looked at her then, not with disappointment, but with that quiet understanding that had drawn her to him from the start. "You should go," he said softly. "You've worked for this. The world deserves your words." Clara's throat tightened. "And what about you?" He smiled faintly, though his eyes gave away the truth. "I'll be here, same as always." The words were simple, but they cut deep, because she knew he meant it. He would wait, not out of desperation but out of faith. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stepped outside barefoot on the dewy grass, the stars spilling across the sky like silver confetti. Ethan joined her quietly, standing close enough that their shoulders brushed. "I hate this part," she said, voice trembling. "Which part?" "The part where something beautiful has to end just when it feels perfect." He turned to her, his voice low. "Maybe it doesn't end. Maybe it just changes shape." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "You always make it sound so simple." He smiled softly. "Because love isn't about holding on, Clara. It's about knowing when to let go, and trusting that what's real never disappears." A tears blurred her vision. She reached out, her fingers finding his. "You make it sound easy. It's not," he said, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "But it's worth it." When morning came, the valley was quiet, too quiet. Her bags were packed, the car fixed, the road waiting. Ethan helped her load the trunk, his movements calm, almost methodical, though his heart raced beneath the surface. Before she got in, she turned to him, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to say goodbye to this place to you." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the reflection of herself in his eyes. "Then don't," he whispered. "Just promise me one thing. Wherever you go, don't lose the quiet you found here." The Clara's tears slipped freely now. She reached up, resting her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "I won't. But you have to promise me something too. Anything. Don't close your door again. Don't go back to being alone. Promise me that." He hesitated, then nodded. "Only if you promise to come back." Her lips trembled into a smile. "That's not fair." "Neither is love," he said softly. And then the kiss. Slow, deep, and devastatingly gentle. It wasn't the kind of kiss that asked for forever. It was one that remembered forever, that carried the promise of return, no matter how much time passed. When she finally drove away, Ethan stood by the gate, watching until her car disappeared down the curve of the road. The sound of her engine faded into the forest, leaving only silence, the kind he had once loved but now feared. For weeks, he lived as he had before, working, reading, walking the trails, but nothing felt the same. The air still smelled of her perfume, the cabin still echoed with her laughter, and her half-finished manuscript still lay on his desk. A story that began in the rain and ended in hope. Each morning he made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, even though one always went cold, and every time he stepped onto the porch, he found himself looking at the horizon, waiting. He never said the words aloud, but his heart whispered them every night, "Come back." And somewhere, in a city wrapped in neon lights and noise, Clara felt it, that quiet pull toward the mountains, toward the man who had shown her that love wasn't about staying. It was about belonging, no matter the distance. Because real love doesn't fade in absence, it grows stronger in silence. Winter had passed. The mountains were soft with new bloom, and spring had laid her golden hands across the valley once more. The world was waking up, but Ethan Cole still lived in the hush between seasons. It had been months since Clara left, and the cabin had returned to its silence. The mornings were the hardest. He still brewed 2 cups of coffee out of habit, one for himself, one for the memory of her. The steam rose and vanished into the air, carrying her name with it, and every day he whispered to himself, maybe today. He didn't count the days anymore, he counted the moments she had touched. The half-open book on the table she never finished reading. The scarf hanging near the fireplace she forgot to take. Her handwriting on a note she left by his window. You made me remember what peace feels like. Some days he wondered if she would ever return. Other days he knew she would, because love that real doesn't disappear. It circles back when both hearts are ready. Then one morning, while driving into town for groceries, the same town, the same road, the same list that once began their story, he saw her. At first, he thought it was just the light playing tricks. The sun was bright, the air glimmering with the shimmer of dust and pollen. But there she was, standing near Harper's Market, the wind catching her hair, her hands holding a paper bag like before. Clara. For a moment he couldn't move. His heart stuttered, his breath caught, and time, obediently, slowed. The sight of her, radiant, calm, alive, felt like the world had finally exhaled after holding its breath all this time. She turned, as if she felt him before she saw him, and when their eyes met, every mile, every silence, every lonely night vanished. She smiled first. That same smile, soft, knowing, and a little teary at the edges. He parked his truck, stepped out, and walked toward her slowly, like a man stepping back into a dream he was afraid to wake from. You forgot the coffee, she said gently, holding up a small paper bag. I thought I'd return the favor. He let out a breath that turned into a quiet laugh, part disbelief, part joy. You came back. I never really left, she whispered. I just had to finish the story. They stood there in the sunlight, the same place where it all began. Two souls meeting again, where fate had first written their names side by side. Tell me, he said softly, did you find what you were looking for? She stepped closer, her eyes shimmering with the truth she had carried for months. I found everything I wasn't brave enough to ask for. I found peace, Ethan. I found home, and I realized. Her voice faltered slightly. It wasn't a place, it was a person. He felt the world tilt, the air thicken, his chest ache. She had always spoken like poetry. And this right now was the verse he'd been waiting for. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch trembling with memory and reverence. You're late, he teased gently, voice low and rough with emotion. She smiled through her tears. You waited. I always would. The wind carried their silence, filling the space between them with everything words couldn't hold. He pulled her close, and when she leaned into him, it felt like time finally exhaled, like the story had been waiting for this exact heartbeat to end its pause. Later, they drove back together, up the familiar winding road, past the trees, past the river, to the cabin that still held traces of her everywhere. She stepped inside, setting down her bag, her eyes roaming over the space as though reacquainting herself with a dream. Nothing's changed, she said softly. Everything has, he replied. You came back. The evening wrapped around them like velvet. He lit the fire and she curled up beside him, her head resting against his shoulder. For a long time they didn't speak, because some moments don't need words, they only need presence. After a while, she lifted her head and whispered, You know, when I left I thought I was choosing my career over love. But I realized I was just finding my way back to it. He looked at her, eyes tender and full of awe. And what happens now? She smiled faintly, tracing her fingers along his hand. Now we stop searching for what's next. We just live this. He kissed her then, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that feels like a homecoming, like the universe finally setting everything back in place. The fire crackled softly, the air outside hummed with life, and the cabin, once a house of silence, became alive again with laughter, warmth, and the quiet hum of forever. In the days that followed, Clara wrote again, not about pain or loss, but about belonging. Her next novel began with the same words that defined her own life. He drove into town for groceries, and left with the woman who changed his life. When she showed Ethan the finished manuscript, he smiled quietly, his hand brushing over hers. You finally finished your story. She looked at him, her eyes glowing with peace. No, she said softly. This time I started one, and as the last light of day slipped behind the ridges, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, they stood together on the porch, two souls who had wandered far and found their way back to each other, not by chance, but by fate. For some loves are not meant to burn fast. They are meant to glow forever. And so, in the heart of the mountains, beneath a sky that had watched their every step, Ethan and Clara finally found what neither had been looking for. Forever, quietly disguised as home. Every love story leaves an echo, a trace of what the soul once felt, a whisper that time cannot erase. Ethan and Clara's story was never about coincidence, it was about alignment. The way two lives, moving separately, slowly found their rhythm in the quiet pulse of destiny. He drove into town for groceries, an errand of routine, and left with a reason to believe in magic again. She arrived as a stranger with tired eyes and a guarded heart, but found in him the calm she didn't know she was searching for. Through fleeting seasons, separation and silence, their story proved a truth so simple yet so profound. Love doesn't always happen in grand gestures. Sometimes it lives in the stillness between heartbeats, in shared mornings, in waiting in return. When Clara came back, it wasn't just a reunion. It was a recognition. A reminder that no matter how far one wanders, the heart always knows its home. The mountains bore witness to their beginning, and now they watched them settle into eternity. Two souls who had lived lost and found each other not by accident, but by divine design. Ethan's cabin, once quiet and aching with absence, was now alive again, not just with laughter but with meaning. Every corner breathed her presence, every sunrise carried the warmth of her smile. She didn't just change his life, she redefined it. And when Clara finished her novel, she didn't write about endings. She wrote about awakenings, about finding the extraordinary in the ordinary, the eternal in the momentary. Her story, their story, became a testament that sometimes fate doesn't shout, it whispers. In the end, love didn't demand perfection. It simply asked for presence. He offered patience. She offered trust. And together, they built a forever from the simplest beginning. A drive to town on an ordinary morning. Because real love isn't found in what you seek. It finds you when you're ready to feel again. And so, under the golden hush of another sunset, with the valley glowing and the air scented with pine and promise, Ethan held Clara's hand and said the only words that ever truly mattered, "You were worth the wait." And she smiled, the kind of smile that told him every storm, every silence, every lonely night was worth it. Because love, when it's true, doesn't end. It just comes home.